So I go to my doctor and I say, oh, I'm bursting into tears, not coping. I'm feeling sick. I freaking headache. How long is this shit going to last? He says, the printer starts going. He's on his computer and then the printer starts going and I go, yeah, here we go. I'm going to get 5 milligrams of something great. You little freaking beauty. Excellent. Oh, I don't have to feel this shit any longer. And then he hands me this bloody 8-page document from the New York Times, Jonty,
Yeah.
and says, Ness, you need to read this. And it's titled, and this is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's titled, Many People Taking Antidepressants Discover They Cannot Quit. The moment I read that, that was like a flag to a bull. I'm
Mm.
going, you bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit. I don't need that
Watch
script
it.
actually.
Yeah.
FYI,
Yeah.
I don't need that script of 5 milligrams of magic. I'm going to do this on my own.
Yeah.
Do not tell me I can't, you know. So I read the document, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And we're going to share with anybody out there that's struggling with withdrawal from medication. Um, you are not alone. And we'll share the link, I imagine, down below, Jonty.
Yeah. So if you want to check it out, like you say, it's called Many People Taking Antidepressants Discover They Cannot Quit by Benedict Carey and Robert Gabeloff, I want to say.
Yes.
Jebeloff.
Hmm.
Um, Apologies for probably mispronouncing his name. It's from April in 2018 in the New York Times, and we'll have a link down below to straight to a PDF so you can check that out.
Mm.
Feel free to pause this and go and have a read and come back, or we'll refer to it along the way as well. So, however you want to interact with that, the link's down below. Yeah, and like just want to echo what you say. Whenever you're on any sort of drug that, like you say, not only alters your brain, but it alters your physical chemistry in your body. So it's a when it's changing your head and your body at the same time, in a way that's inextricably linked. Coming off that can be. It's not like in year 12 I came off coffee because I was drinking too much caffeine and I got a bit of a headache at 11 o'clock in the morning for a while.
Yeah.
It's not like you know it's much trickier than that for a lot of people can find, especially when, like you say, the symptoms of withdrawal are very similar to the symptoms for which you're taking the medication in the first place, which can be
Yeah.
very confusing and very, like, it makes you think, have second thoughts about, like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Which then brings in more of those anxious and unsure thoughts. And
Mm.
it can be, yeah, really, really difficult. And I love what you're saying about doing that with Slink along the way as well. Even if you're
Mm.
not literally going off a drug with someone,
Mm.
having someone that you can talk to about it
Support.
is just so important.
Mm.
Just while you're sharing that story, I was reflecting on my own experiences. So I wasn't on antidepressants for nearly as long, but yeah, similar to Slink, after quite a serious depressive episode, was prescribed. I think from memory it was Lexapro. It's definitely an escitalopram variant, one of which is Lexapro, for the purpose of flattening and squashing my mood for long enough to get me through uni.
How good is it though?
Oh, not only did it get me my degree, definitely, like it was not a good time for Jonathan in those days. So definitely a massive help in getting me through those couple of years. But my experience, and I want to as well just remind people that like everyone's experience will be slightly different with this stuff. So my experience being on those drugs had just as many quote unquote negative symptoms as the withdrawals were. So my appetite rocketed and bombed almost weekly. My weight fluctuated and fluctuated up and down, up and down, up and down for about 18 months. And then with the withdrawals, my appetite, having finally started to settle, the withdrawals kicked in when I stopped, and the same thing happened. So quite commonly is the weight element with these drugs is probably the most obvious symptom that people notice in themselves because you can see it as well as feel it. And same as you, I was feeling super uncomfortable in my body,
Oh,
and feeling like it was out of my control as well. As
yeah.
someone that
Yeah.
all the way through high school was very into sport, very, you know, pretty fit. And all of a sudden, out of high school, I was in uni, and it was like I'd lost control over what I felt like
Mm,
in my body.
mm.
Yeah, there's heaps of places we could start with this article. Is there anything in particular that jumped out to you?
Yeah, I wanted to share just one more experiential thing I that made me extremely sad. Aurora and I had been doing this journey together, and she was coming off Lexapro, and she'd been out, and she felt that she was getting increased social anxiety. So she was finding herself not wanting to go out as much and engage, even with the people that she loves the most, because she was feeling anxious in social settings. And she just pushed herself and she went, no, I'm going to F this. I'm going to be with my friend. So she met the friend for dinner, and she came home, and I could hear her pulling into the house, and she came up the stairs sobbing. I could hear her crying her heart out as she came up the stairs. And I thought, oh shit, she's had an accident. Oh my God, what's happened? It was really quite dramatic. And I got up and I said, babe, what's up? And she said, Mum, I've just realized I don't want to die. Like, to realize you don't want to die. Like, the reason she went on the medication was because she wanted to die.
Mm,
She didn't want
yeah,
to live anymore. So, yeah, you need to be on the gear when you feel like that, mate. But
yeah,
she's just realized she actually wants to be alive and live. For the first time in her adult brain, had she experienced this feeling. And it was I was so heartbroken for her because she was so upset it had occurred to her and to me that her entire young adult life, 17 to 24, all the way through uni, she has not operated without medication.
mm,
And she was starting to feel the full scope of feelings. And we started to laugh about this because she'd get really funny and that really edgy and really moody and really sad. And so she would feel these full scope of the full complexity of emotions that she was not familiar with because she'd been flatlining since she was
mm.
17. And she felt really sad and really robbed. It started to occur to her, why on earth did the doctor who keeps giving her the prescription every 6 months not tell her or encourage her to wean off the drugs? Because what we realized when we read this document is that antidepressants were not originally designed for long term use. They were designed for 6 to 9 months for acute episodes of depression.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that jumps out to me here in this article, it says long-term use of antidepressants is surging in the United States, according to new analysis. Yada, yada, yada. Some 15.5 million Americans have been taking the medication for at least 5 years. This rate has doubled since 2010 and more than tripled since the year 2000. The drugs
Mm,
were initially approved for short-term use, following
yeah,
studies typically lasting about 2 months. Even today, there is little data about their effects on people taking them for years, although there are now millions of such users.
yeah,
So, yeah, and like we talked about, the great benefit that the both of us and Slink, by the sounds of it, have gotten out of these
mm,
antidepressants
mm,
is what they were designed for, which is to flatten your mood for a short term to get you through a serious episode.
yeah,
but we're finding more and more that long-term candidates, and that's a thing that's a word that people use. Like that's almost a medical term now that I've heard in a number of different places when we're talking about antidepressants and GPs prescribing these drugs to people is,
Mm,
oh, you're a
mm,
long-term candidate. You'll probably be on these
mm.
drugs for a long time. And we actually don't have any, there's no little, well, there is data, but there's not nearly as much data as we would like to be just yeah, putting people on them for such a long time
And
without a plan to get off them.
my angry brain, my pissed off justice part of my brain says there's a reason for that because pharmaceutical companies are making bank
Oh, for
on
sure.
this.
Yeah.
And there's no way to really know or any hard, fast research on how to get off these suckers.
Mm.
And that's irritating in itself because it's
And
kind of
especially
trial and
because
error.
that's right. If like all the data is for 2 to 6 months, and all of a sudden we've got millions of people who've been on them for 5 to 10 years,
Yep. Yep.
and we don't have the data and the analysis to have like documented healthy ways to come off them.
Mm,
Um,
mm. And one
yeah.
of the psychiatrists in this article talks about the way he came off it was, in a capsule, you open a capsule and there's little beads of medication in there.
Yeah.
His symptoms were so horrific that he would pick out one bead at a time and stabilize on that one less of a bead, then eat the capsule until he came down to no beads.
Yeah.
Hence the withdrawal, the adverse response to coming off the medication. It was so affecting him so deeply. Can I read you this? It
Yeah.
says this: the medical profession has no good answer for people struggling to stop taking drugs. No scientifically no scientifically backed guidelines, no means to determine who's at the higher risk of, no way to tailor appropriate strategies to individuals. Some people are essentially being parked on these drugs for convenience sake because it's too difficult to tackle the issue of taking them off, said Dr. Anthony Kendrick, a professor of primary care at the University of Southampton in Britain. With government funding, he is developing online and telephone support to help practitioners and patients. Should we really be putting so many people on antidepressants long term when we don't know if it's good for them or whether they'll be able to come off?
Mm. Yeah.
It's frightening, man.
It is, and it's when we talk about something like alcoholism, for example, right? It's much easier to talk about because there's such a clear, like, damaging effect of the drug, right?
Yep,
When you're an alcoholic,
yep,
you can point to the alcohol as the root cause of all sorts of different issues, and so therefore becoming sober you can very easily point backwards to the issue. Whereas when we're talking about antidepressants, they're there for a good reason and they actually
yep,
provide a very, very useful
yep,
place in
yep.
people's like well-being.
Mm,
Um, and so it's way more complicated because you have to kind of peel apart the layers of how much of this is helpful, how much of this is now just stabilizing, and how much of
mm,
this is now addictive.
mm,
There's all sorts of data about addictive behavior
mm,
that people can dive into. Maybe I'll put some of that in the show
mm,
notes as well.
mm,
I
mm.
would be interested to overlay some of that stuff on some of the data that's coming out now about coming off antidepressants and
Yeah,
how much overlap there is between the addictive behavior that we have all the data from things like alcoholism and drug abuse,
yeah.
where that overlaps with antidepressants as well.
And listen to this, Jonty. In this same article, antidepressants are not harmless. They commonly cause emotional numbing,
Yep.
sexual problems like a lack of desire, or wait for it, fellas, erectile dysfunction and
Hmm.
weight gain.
Yep.
Long term users report in interviews a creeping unease that is hard to measure. Daily pill poppers leave them doubting their own resilience. And I can't, I, I totally agree with that. Totally agree.
Yeah.
He says this, we've come to a place, at least in the West, where it seems either every other person is depressed or on a medication, said Edward Shorter, a historian on psychiatry at the University of Toronto. You do have to wonder what this says about our culture,
Hmm.
you
And
know?
I'll be 100% honest. When I'm, 2019 Jonathan, I'll put up with emotional numbing, sexual dysfunction, lack of desire, and weight gain
Same.
if it means I'm
Don't want to
gonna,
die.
if it means I don't want to die, if it means I'm gonna live through the year, right?
Yeah.
But it's 2, 3 years later
Yeah.
when and I want to add as well, we haven't even talked about the place that therapy takes in this
Oh,
conversation,
yeah.
and doing the work to get better,
100%.
really interrogating yourself and going to the gym, so to speak, to,
Yeah.
you know, to really tackle what the issues are, whether they're emotional or psychological or whatever they are. Therapy is a
Mm.
huge place in that. After 2, 3 years of like quite intense therapy, a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation, a lot of antidepressants, at that point, it's almost like you have to keep cycling back to that like system analysis of like, is the weight gain, is the sexual dysfunction, is the mood flattening,
Is it
is
worth
that
it?
still worth it?
Mm.
And I think, yeah, if you can honestly look at it and go, I don't think that's worth it anymore.
Mm.
It'd be great if we lived in a world at which that point you can then go, oh, there are these options
Mm.
that are going to help me
Mm.
safely and healthily
Mm.
wean myself off these drugs. But it seems like we're kind of just, especially if you're a long-term candidate, if you've been on these drugs for 5 years, for example,
Mm.
7 years, 10 years, it's kind of like, yep, stop taking them. Good luck to you. That can be really, really, like really difficult.
Yeah. This cardiologist that I saw, she said to me when I told her that I was the journey of coming off mirtazapine, she said, we can't discount that with your heart condition right now because that drug affects your neurology, yeah? The synapses, the firing of your brain. I wonder, has it had a synapses firing issue problem on my heart? I never had this issue before.
Mm.
And I wonder, I don't know. And no doctor is going to claim that because that could be an interesting little litigation, I would imagine. No one's ever going to admit to something like that. It's certainly not, I was going to say in the show notes, it's not in their contraindications,
Mm.
but you can't discount that stuff, you know? And there is a reason that when you come off these hardcore medications, you must seek medical attention
Yep.
to do it. You
Yep.
must be guided through it because it is risky, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Is now a good time to share Aurora's post?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to do that, John T?
I can do that. Yeah. So, like you mentioned, Ness, your daughter Aurora, had shared some of her story online about coming off antidepressants. I won't read the whole thing, but there are chunks in her Instagram post from this article that we're referencing as well. But I'll read some of the caption as well. So there's some quotes from this article. Antidepressants initially were approved. I'll say that again. Antidepressants initially were approved for short-term use following studies typically lasting about 2 months. Antidepressants were originally considered a short-term treatment for episodic mood problems to be taken for 6 to 9 months, enough to get through a crisis and no more. And then she goes on to say, 7 years, my adulthood. 7 emotionally numb years. She talks about how she's grateful for those antidepressants saving her life and pulling her through a depressive episode, but I never anticipated how intense the withdrawals would be or how drastically different I would feel afterwards. No doctor ever warned me about this or suggested short-term usage. That's interesting. No doctor ever
Yeah.
along the way
No,
suggested short-term usage.
no.
Withdrawal, quote, withdrawal has never been a focus for drug makers or government regulators because they felt antidepressants could not be addictive. My withdrawal symptoms of relentless dizziness, confusion, extreme fatigue, nausea, irritability, insomnia, and disequilibrium suggest otherwise. I haven't experienced adulthood without relying on my antidepressants. I haven't felt this array of emotions in 7 years. I care about surviving. Lexapro masked me for far too long. I care more, I feel more, and I truly want to live, and it's now time to.
Yeah, amazing.
We'll put a link to that as well if people want to go and check that out. But huge props to Slink for posting that.
I know it was
Super
really,
brave.
it was brave, wasn't it, of her to say that. And a girl that she went through might have been, Aurora did a psych degree and a speech pathology master's. And one of the psychs wrote in one of the comments about a support place that an app, a support app that you can go to when you are withdrawing from medication. Now, I didn't know that, and I thought that would have been an extremely helpful thing.
Mm,
And we should put that down below as well.
for
I
sure.
can't quite locate it at the moment, but it's definitely in her. It's in her.
On the post there. I'll go through and see if I can find it later.
Yeah,
I'll make
amazing.
sure it's down there.
Yeah, it's it. I figured that could be really helpful for people
Absolutely.
coming off gear for that ongoing support.
Mm,
Yeah,
absolutely. So we'll make sure that those links are down below if people want to follow up on those.
yeah,
Yeah. So obviously the asterisk that I'm sure we said at the top that I'll say here again is like go and talk to your GP. We're not doctors.
yeah. No,
But
that's right.
I think it's important to talk about like with Slink sharing that post. It's
Mm,
important for people to share those experiences so
mm,
that like you and Slink going off and withdrawing from medication at the same time, it's not
mm.
a scary, lonely experience of experiencing massive changes in your head and your body at the same time
Yeah,
without
yeah.
feeling like you're able to talk to someone about it. But and that's great advice for any big change in your life. Don't do it solo. Like find someone that
Mm.
you can share that with.
You
Yeah.
need the support 100%. You need the daily support from a partner or a best friend or a family member.
Yeah.
But you also need that medical support. That's absolutely critical. Don't attempt to do this thing without medical professionals overseeing you because it is full scale. And I had dark thoughts. That's why I went to the doctor, and that's why I ended up with this article because I was sobbing my guts out, and I'm saying to him, I'm saying, Ivor, I feel terrible. I've had a dark thought. I thought maybe, and I told him what the dark thought was, and it was that I'd be better off not here on this earth anymore.
Mm.
And he looked at, and I felt really ashamed for feeling that thought. And it was
Yeah.
fleeting, but it upset me enough to go to see him because I thought, oh, this is really dangerous that I would think, would I do that? Like, that's terrible. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, Vanessa, how many of those dark thoughts have you had? I said, oh, I had that one time. It was one time and it upset me so much. He said, oh, I have them daily.
Mm.
He said that. I have them daily. And I kind of, A, it put it in perspective for me, but B, I thought, oh, you poor bastard, maybe you need to go on Lexapro. You know, that's, I don't want to live with those dark thoughts. That's terrible. And it was only fleeting. And for me, it was only once. So I feel very blessed because I know people that have them often,
Mm.
very intrusive thoughts about really,
Yeah.
horrible things.
Yeah.
Can I read you something that Dr. Stockman at the end of this article
Yeah.
says?
Please.
Dr. Stockman, the psychiatrist in East London, wasn't entirely convinced withdrawal was a serious issue before he went through it himself. His micro tapering strategy finally worked. That's where he was pulling out one bead of medication at a time out
Yeah.
of the capsule.
Yeah.
And he says this: there was a really significant moment, he recalled. I was walking down near my house past a forest, and I suddenly realised I could feel the full range of emotions again. The birds were louder. The colours were more vivid. I was happy.
Mm.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was 100% my experience as well. Um,
Yeah,
Super grateful for the blessing of the medication that
yeah,
I was prescribed that got me through a
yeah,
really rough period in my life. But
yeah.
on the other side, it's almost like it creeps up on you, and I had a number of moments of suddenly going, "Oh my gosh, I haven't felt." It's not even necessarily joy explicitly or specifically.
Yeah.
It's just that depth of experience and feeling. And like I remember thinking a lot during that time when I was taking medication that Jesus talks constantly about bringing life to the full and drink deep from the living water for it brings life and life to the full. And going, I'm not experiencing life to the full. I'm experiencing life and I'm grateful for that because that wasn't a given at one point. But now that that really dark point in my life has been pushed through
Yeah.
and healed, the deep healing that had to occur. Yeah, it's time to start living again. And that's
Mm,
also what jumps out to me about the piece that Slink wrote as well is like
mm,
when when your emotional state is being flattened because in
mm.
raising your mood to a flat level, it's also squashing it down to a flat
Yeah.
level. You're just not experiencing the full range of emotion.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed in my withdrawal, I had this morning and I leapt out of bed and I'd just been the night before and seen Titanic, which is this hilarious musical pop musical with all of Celine Dion's music. It's really funny, hilarious. And you know that song, I'm Alive? You know, she sings that. I leapt out of bed and I danced out into the kitchen singing, I'm alive. And Rob looked at me, turned around as he's making eggs, says, wow, I haven't seen you with that much pizzazzle in a long time. And I said, yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but I've got this. Oh, I feel so joyful. I feel so joyful. Like it caught me by surprise, caught me by surprise. And I like to think
Mm.
I operate with a high level of that anyway. But oh, it was just a stunning sensation as I felt like I was coming back online.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A shout out for people that are going to attempt to come off their drugs or have tried to come off their drugs. This doctor says this: I have seen lots of people, patients, not being believed, not being taken seriously when they complained about the withdrawal. He adds, that has to stop.
Mm. Amen to that.
And yeah, needs to. And we need to talk about it.